Mr. President, what happened in Flint, Michigan is incredible. In the 21st century, in the most developed country on earth, to think that 100,000 people were exposed to contaminated water, to think that 9,000 or 10,000 children were exposed to lead poisoning. It was not a natural disaster, but the results are disastrous. It was a disaster created by those who were in charge of managing the city of Flint. The governmental agencies and those who worked for them made what they considered to be the right budgetary decisions, but they certainly made the wrong decisions when it came to the health and the well-being of the poor people who were victimized by their wrongdoing. Every time I hear the story, the same question comes to my mind. Who's going to jail for poisoning 9,000 children? Think about the circumstances here. A knowing decision by a city manager to switch to a water supply which was contaminated and endangered the health of thousands of children, tens of thousands of citizens. If that isn't the grounds for at least investigation, I don't know what is. And so the senators from Michigan, Senator Peters, Senator Stabenow, have come to the floor of the Senate and said to America, will you help Flint, Michigan? And it's right that they do so. I've been fortunate to serve in the House and the Senate for many years, and I can't tell you how many times senators from states all across the nation have asked that same question. Will you help us in Louisiana? Will you help us in Alabama? Will you help us in Texas? There's hardly a state that hasn't come to the floor of the Senate asking for help. And yet, for reasons I can't explain, the Republican majority in the United States Senate is resisting this idea. Almost 100,000 people were forced to live without access to clean water in their homes. They couldn't turn on their faucets in the morning to make breakfast or take a shower, like all of us do. They started their day by waiting in long lines for bottled water to feed and bathe their kids, to take showers, and to stay healthy. They started rationing the water. The elderly and disabled that couldn't make it to a pickup location for bottled water, they're left with the option of continuing to use water they know is poisoning their bodies. This is a disaster by any definition. I can't understand why there isn't more understanding and empathy from my colleagues when it comes to Flint, Michigan. It could happen anywhere. And if it happened, would you hesitate for a moment as a member of the United States Senate to ask for help? 9,000 children exposed to lead poisoning has been called an earmark by the critics of our senators from Michigan. They said it's just special interest legislation to try to help these children or these victims. That's hard to imagine they could reach that level in criticizing this effort. Just like those who suffered from tornadoes and hurricanes, these families did nothing to deserve it. And just as the federal government always helps when Americans are hit by disasters, we should do it in Flint. There were no complaints last May when the federal government declared an emergency and reached out to the residents of Texas to help them rebuild their lives after a tornado hit. So I'm wondering if the Republican presidential candidate from Texas is willing to step up, the junior senator from Texas, and ask for the same level of federal assistance for Flint, Michigan that he asked for his own state. This crisis is not the fault of the kids, the pregnant women that still call Flint home. Their only crime was living in a city that was so poorly mismanaged by the Michigan state government. Their only crime, if there was one, was being the victims of cheap, dirty water. These kids and pregnant women are the most vulnerable when it comes to lead contamination. We aren't going to know for years the extent of the damage, but we know there will be damage. Many of them live in homes that have been found to have 10 times the EPA limit for lead in drinking water. Senator from Michigan, Senator Stabenow, yesterday told us that some of the lead samples reached the level of toxic dumps, so far beyond the level that's acceptable for human consumption. This means that a generation of Flint's kids are in danger of suffering brain damage, developmental delays, and behavior issues for the rest of their lives. And to add insult to injuries, when mothers came to the state nurse to fight for their children, they were met with apathy and listened to what they were told, and I quote, "It's just a few IQ points. It's not the end of the world." This is supposedly a quote from a state nurse. The Flint water crisis truly is a tragedy. We need to step forward. And it doesn't just mean funding. It reminds us of the importance of clean drinking water that we all take for granted. When I think of all the efforts on the floor of the Senate to dismantle the Environmental Protection Agency and to remove their authority to deal with issues involving clean water, it is hard to imagine that they could envision what happened in Flint. Because having access to clean water shouldn't be determined by your zip code or your governor. Hope my Republican colleagues will work with us on a bipartisan basis, the way we always do when it comes to disasters that hurt innocent people.